Et c'est donc le premier échange de cette quatrième et dernière journée de cette 25e édition du Salon du Livre. Et on commence avec un cycle de voyage dans le temps. Et là, c'est le passé, avec de l'histoire au roman, quand l'écriture fait revivre le passé, le roman historique, avec Nilima Rao, Bernard Domeyne et Tania K. Roxborogh. Et avant de commencer, je vais demander à nos auteurs de se présenter un par un. Donc on va commencer par Bernard, qui a déjà son micro activé. Puis après, on passera à nos deux autres invité.
Oui, donc bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Bernard Domeyne, je suis originaire de la région lyonnaise. Et donc, je suis l'auteur d'une dizaine de romans historiques qui portent sur l'Espagne arabo-musulmane, sur l'Empire romain finissant, et sur donc, la Polynésie avec Eyani au Pacifique immense, qui est publié chez Arepo.
Oh, kia ora koutou, ko Tania Roxborogh toku ingoa, he uri ahau o Ngāti Porou. My name is Tania Roxborogh. My iwi, my tribe is Ngāti Porou. I was an English teacher for 35 years. I've written 5 historical novels. 3 were a trilogy set in 11th century Scotland, England and France. Basically, I stole the story from Shakespeare's Macbeth and imagined life 10 years after the play finished. I also have written a novel about a protest in New Zealand called the Bastion Point Protest for children. And I suppose in a way it's historical. I also wrote a memoir of my life.
Yarana, my name's Nilima Rao. I am a Fijian, Indian, Australian author, and I've written 2 historical novels so far. They're both set in Fiji in the early 1900s, and they are focused on the experience of Indians who were taken to Fiji to work on the sugar plantations as indentured labourers. So I'm working on the 3rd novel at the moment. I'm here in Tahiti for 2 months on a residency working on my 3rd novel, the 3rd one in the series.
Avant de passer à notre échange et parler précisément du passé, on va revenir sur ce choix du roman historique. Comment on en arrive à écrire dans l'histoire? Qu'est-ce qui motive ce choix? Pourquoi vous avez choisi de raconter une histoire qui se passait dans le passé? Pourquoi quand vous choisissez de raconter une histoire, parce que je sais que tu fais aussi des polars, Bernard, pourquoi de temps en temps tu décides de retourner dans le temps pour raconter ce que tu as raconté? Et ça marche aussi pour vous deux.
Oui, c'est une bonne question. La réponse est assez facile. Je crois que le roman policier, c'est un espace de liberté, puisqu'on n'est pas du tout contraint par une trame. Le roman historique, c'est quelque chose de beaucoup plus difficile, parce qu'on s'inscrit dans une trame, donc on doit la respecter autant que faire se peut. Après, il y a des choix à faire, effectivement. Est-ce qu'on s'en tient à un roman strictement historique, ou est-ce qu'on fait une fiction historique en prenant beaucoup de liberté? Moi, j'ai toujours fait le choix de rédiger des romans assez historiques quand même si, bien évidemment, il y a une partie romancée à chaque fois. Donc, pour répondre à ta question, je crois que j'aime bien alterner justement les deux exercices. Hein. C'est complètement différent et c'est très enrichissant sur le plan intellectuel.
In the story of Macbeth, the witches prophesy that Banquo's son will become king. And since I was 16, I wanted to know how and when. And my students will often ask me that question. And so I decided to answer the question. But of course, to make it credible, I had to go and investigate what 11th century life was like and learn about Scotland and England and France. But I made a rule for myself that if Shakespeare had access to the thing or the word, I was allowed to use it in my novel. And I made one mistake because I put one of my characters drinking tea, and tea didn't arrive in Europe until after Shakespeare died. For Charlie Tangaroa, I'm really motivated, particularly for my young readers, to tell them the stories of the past and the recent past. So for them, 1975, 1984, 2000 is the past. And so in the teaching moments or in the things that Charlie hears from the people around him to try and make sense of what he sees right now, I use real stories from the past. So it's a kind of sneaky way of teaching history to our children.
So for me, the choice of historical novels. I probably read a lot more fantasy, you know, Game of Thrones, that sort of thing. But I really wanted to set a book in Fiji at this time period because, so I'm Fijian Indian. I'm a descendant of the Indians who went to Fiji to work in the cane fields. But I grew up in Australia and I knew so little about this story myself that when I started researching and started learning more about it, I thought, well, if I don't know this story, all the tourists who go to Fiji definitely don't know the story. They're probably wondering why there's so many Indians there. So I wanted to write something that's a novel, that's fiction. I also write crime stories, and I wanted to write something that you could read and on the beach while you're having your holiday, but still also learn a little bit about the history of Fiji. So that was my goal. If I could have figured out how to get dragons into Fiji, I probably would have gone with fantasy, but not to be.
Ça me permet de transitionner justement cette histoire de dragon, puisque juste quand on choisit d'écrire son histoire dans un contexte historique précis, est-ce que ça ne représente pas une difficulté supplémentaire au niveau, parce que ça t'enferme au final dans des contraintes historiques, et est-ce que du coup c'est pas challengeant, est-ce que c'est pas difficile comme exercice?
Sorry. Yeah, definitely. So if I had known how hard it was going to be to write a historical novel, a crime novel, and a novel set in a country that I didn't grow up in, I grew up in Australia, I might not have written this as my first novel. Might have started with something easier. But yes, there's a lot of constraints. So I was trying very much to be historically accurate in terms of the backdrop. A lot of the stories have some element of truth or are based on something I saw in my research in terms of an anecdote that I saw in my research, but overall the story is fictional and the characters are all fictional. Only the backdrop is hopefully true to life. But I was giving an example the other day of I originally wanted to have a female main character, a female protagonist, a woman who's investigating the crime, but there was no way in that time I could have an Indian woman investigating a crime, and I wanted my protagonist to be Indian. So I ended up having to switch and make it a man and make him a police officer, which I found some historical precedents, some historical stories about Sikh police officers who went to Fiji, who went from Hong Kong to Fiji to help build the police force there because it was quite a young colony. So I based my main character on these articles that I saw in the newspaper about these Sikh police officers, which then, of course, added the complication that now my character is not just a man, which I am not, but he's also Sikh. And I'm like, I don't know anything about the Sikh religion, so I had to go learn about that as well. So yeah, you keep adding more and more challenges for yourself.
C'est à vous de voir comment vous...
Sorry. So I had an idea that I wanted my protagonist, male protagonist and my female protagonist to get together, but they weren't allowed to because of the rules. And so I had to do a deep dive into church history and precedent that would give a reason for a bishop to allow a royal wedding. I won't tell you any more than that, but it was very frustrating and it stopped my writing for some time. But thankfully, someone in the past who was possibly, maybe royal, but maybe not, but there was a question on their parentage, was allowed to marry a royal, which was really good. Also, disclaimers at the start of the book can save your butt. I think personally, I read because I want to learn about the character and the characters' lives, and I don't want to be distracted by errors in the world that is being built. So it is on me as a writer to make sure that that world building is correct. But if I make a change out of respect for the reader, I will let them know, just to let you know, this is a little bit different, except for the tea thing. I quickly got told by a reader that I stuffed up there. So I like what you said about world building. I think you've got to get that canvas right. And then the main thing is the action of the characters. And I always tell my writing students it doesn't have to be real, but it has to be true, regardless of where you set it.
Oui, donc je reprends la question de départ, c'était est-ce que c'est une contrainte? Oui, bien sûr que c'est une contrainte, mais ce n'est une contrainte que si on n'aime pas l'histoire. donc en fait, le récit doit s'inscrire bien sûr dans une trame, et cette trame, il faut l'étudier, il faut creuser, il faut se documenter. Après, dans la documentation, il faut également pondérer ce qu'on a pu rassembler. Et puis après, il faut prendre parti sur le sujet qu'on traite et se lancer dans l'écriture. Et à ce moment-là, la contrainte n'en est plus une. Ça devient simplement le cadre de l'imagination de l'auteur.
Merci à tous les trois. Du coup, ça me fait encore une transition, décidément. Vous aimez bien me donner des passerelles, j'aime bien ça. Et du coup, c'était par rapport aux recherches. Fatalement, quand on engage une histoire, des fois, à la suite de recherches, on se rend compte qu'il y a plus d'éléments que ce qu'on avait prévu. Et est-ce que, en découvrant de nouveaux éléments, ça vous a conduit à réfléchir à une autre histoire parce que vous aviez envie de creuser un élément historique que vous avez découvert par le biais de ces recherches?
Oui, en ce qui me concerne, donc, quand je me lance dans un sujet, je reste dans le sujet que je traite. Ce qui est sûr, par contre, c'est qu'au fur et à mesure des récits, je vais prendre un exemple. J'ai écrit un premier ouvrage sur Marie de Magdala, la servante du Christ. Et donc, en l'imaginant, parce que ça c'est dans mon imagination, en l'imaginant gnostique en fait, et non pas chrétienne pure et dure, on va dire. Encore qu'il y aurait beaucoup de choses à dire là-dessus. Et ça m'a conduit effectivement à réfléchir à une trilogie que je suis en train de mener sur le gnosticisme. Et j'ai commis un second roman l'an dernier qui s'appelle Gersante des Albigeois, où je reprends justement l'histoire des Albigeois et de la croisade des Albigeois en France au XIIe siècle. Et je vais entreprendre d'écrire un troisième roman, donc ce sera une trilogie, et ça se passera en Gaule, à l'époque de saint Irénée de Lyon et de sainte Blandine, puisque, pour situer un peu le récit et pourquoi je le relie au gnosticisme, saint Irénée de Lyon a commis une somme qui s'appelle justement contre les hérésies et notamment contre le gnosticisme. Et je pense que c'est quelque chose qui est très important, cette manière d'appréhender l'évolution de la religion chrétienne au travers des personnages de cette trilogie.
Yeah, I don't know if Bernard expected to start with a trilogy when he wrote the first book, but certainly when you do research, you find all these other wonderful things and you go, oh, I want to do that, I want to do that. So my agent is pressing me to do a spin-off for my historical trilogy set in the 11th century around the time of William the Conqueror, because in my investigation into who was William and his wife and some of my French characters, they stay with me, and I want to tell the story of what life was like around the time of the Battle of Hastings. And for Charlie Tangaroa, I have to be really careful as a teacher not to dump information in the story for the students, because I want to go, oh, you should know about this. And whenever you go to a marae, some elder kaumatua will stand up and he will tell you the story of the iwi through the carvings or the artwork in the big wharenui, the big meeting house. And again, you go, I want all of the children to know all of the stories. But again, I have to bring it back to, this is Charlie's story. What is his issue? What is he trying to achieve? And maybe I can colour in a little bit, and then the children who read it might want to go and find out themselves.
Yeah, for me, I think when I was writing the first book, I didn't know that I was going to write any more. I didn't initially start it thinking that it was going to be a trilogy. But there were two things that sort of inspired me as I was doing research for the first book. One is that I kind of came up with this sort of arc across the three books that is based on the sort of journey that the Indians took when they went to Fiji. So the first part of it is set on a plantation, so it's focused on when Indians arrived and lived on the plantation for 5 years, which were really harsh years. So the first book is the darkest. The second book is focused on the time after living on the plantation. So the next 5 years, they were allowed to live in the colony and have their own farms or have their own stores or contract back to the plantations on a casual basis, not having to live under the rules of the plantation. And then the third book is focused on the question of stay in Fiji or go back to India, because after another 5 years, so 10 years all up, a journey was paid for them to go back to India through the program. So when I started learning about that as I was researching the first book, I thought, okay, there's an obvious structure for a trilogy. And also, as I was researching the first book, I was in Fiji. I got to go do some location scouting. So I just went traveling around and found settings that I really wanted to set books in, places that I just loved. So the second book is set in a town called Levuka, and when I went there, I just fell in love with it. So I was very excited about going back there and getting to set a book there. So yes, my research involves a lot of travel to nice places. Great.
Lorsqu'on travaille pour un roman historique, on revient sur le concept du fait qu'on fasse des recherches. Fatalement, on s'enrichit intellectuellement et culturellement, puisque voilà, on emmagasine des données supplémentaires. Mais est-ce que ces recherches, enfin, ou même l'écriture de ce livre a fini par vous grandir humainement? Est-ce qu'il y a eu un travail sur, est-ce que ça a changé quelque chose en vous, au-delà de cette histoire de terre à terre d'enrichissement intellectuel?
Oui, certainement. Je veux dire, quand on écrit sur l'histoire, on est toujours à la recherche de l'humain. Et donc, comprendre, tenter en tout cas de comprendre comment vivaient les Romains au début de l'Empire, comment vivaient les Romains à la fin de l'Empire, comment vivaient les Polynésiens avant l'arrivée des Européens, etc. C'est fatalement un très grand enrichissement, oui.
One of the things that I'm encouraged by is the goodness of people, the resilience, the determination, particularly our people who have suffered so much, or any Indigenous people or groups of people who have to endure and fight for their, what we call mana mo te hake, self-determination, and that there were people who never got to see the results of their hard labour. Like, I suppose, I don't know, even some of the 16th, 17th, 18th century people in Europe who never got to see the good that came out of the works that they did. But reading about them encourages me to keep going, doing the right thing.
For me, as I said, I'm born in Fiji. I'm of Indian descent, and we moved to Australia when I was 3, so I was raised in Australia. And I grew up in North Queensland, where there were not many Indians. I think I was related to all the Indians in the town that I grew up in. So I grew up not embracing my culture at all. Not the Fijian part, not the Indian part. Probably until my late 20s, if you asked me where I was from, I would say Australia, and I would get quite annoyed when people pushed, because what they wanted to hear was Indian. So I would go Australia, and they'd go, no, but where are you really from? And I'd say Fiji. And in Australia, that's okay. They would still go on, oh, but you're Indian, right? And I'd be like, yes. But I lived in the US for a while, and if you try to do that, when they did that, I'd be like, Fiji, Australia, Fiji, and they would be so confused, because in the rest of the world, no one knows there's Indians in Fiji. But anyway, that's a side. I'm on a tangent. So yeah, I grew up kind of rejecting my culture, just wanting to be Australian, not wanting to be identified as Fijian or Indian. And I feel like doing the research and writing these books and spending time in Fiji and spending time with Fijian Indians and Indigenous Fijian, the Itāukei people. And to me, it feels like somehow my personality is more integrated. Like, I am more accepting of all aspects of my cultural background. So for me, the next step is delving into Indian mythology and learning more about that. And yeah, getting more in touch with my Indian roots.
Like you, I grew up knowing that I was Māori, didn't like that I was Māori, didn't want to know anything about Māori. In the 70s and 80s, well, early 80s, being Māori was less than, and that was my thinking, much to my shame. And it wasn't until I started writing books that looked at the historical and mythological stories of Māori that I realised that I was really wrong. And my husband will tell you that in our family, I'm not wrong. I think twice. Once was when my daughter broke her ankle and I said, okay, 3 times. My daughter broke her ankle and I said there was nothing wrong with her. The second time is I thought there were no foxes in Australia. What was the third time? Oh yeah, what I just talked about. And so, like you, I have a little bit of grief, but also we have the saying that you may not know your whakapapa, but your whakapapa knows you. You may not know your ancestors, but your ancestors know you. And so I feel, I'm getting all shivery here, I feel that I have been embraced because I've chosen to turn back to that. So it has changed me, and I'm proud to be Māori, very proud.
Alors ça m'a un peu ému du coup, excusez-moi, donc je me reprends un peu. Pour la question suivante, en gros là, sans parler des projets sur lesquels vous avez déjà dit un mot, Si vous deviez avoir un contexte historique que vous aimeriez exploiter pour un roman, là tout de suite, sans réfléchir, ce serait quel moment de l'histoire?
Oui, donc moi je voudrais rebondir sur la question précédente avant de te répondre. Donc, donc moi je suis un Français pur sucre, hein, 100%. Donc quelqu'un qui a, comment dirais-je, subi une certaine éducation, et les Français en général sont fâchés avec la géographie. Bon, ils savent que Christophe Colomb a découvert l'Amérique, mais ça s'arrête à peu près là, hein. Donc évidemment, des romans historiques qui se déroulent dans le Pacifique, ou qui se déroulent en Andalousie, ou qui se déroulent en Afrique, c'est quelque chose d'extrêmement enrichissant. Donc pour répondre à ta question, donc moi c'est tracé déjà, hein, ce sera les débuts de l'Empire romain, la Gaule, la région lyonnaise plus précisément. Là, donc je retourne à mes amours, hein. Et donc ce sera une histoire basée sur le gnosticisme, mais elle n'est absolument pas écrite. Donc je voulais également rebondir sur ce qui s'est dit précédemment. Quand on écrit des romans historiques, on n'a pas de plan au départ. Quand j'ai d'abord écrit un premier roman qui se passait en Andalousie arabo-musulmane, qui s'appelle Sobeya, princesse de Cordoue. Donc qui se passe en l'an 900 avec l'apogée du califat. Et de fil en aiguille, en fait, j'ai écrit tous les autres, et pour arriver à une tétralogie. Donc il n'y a pas de plan au départ. On ne se dit pas je vais me lancer dans une tétralogie complètement hallucinante sur l'Espagne arabo-andalouse. C'est pas comme ça que ça se passe, hein. C'est pas comme ça que ça se passe.
I'm lazy, so God, historical fiction takes up so much research, and I mean, I love research. I'm doing my PhD, and that's really good. But a book that I'm just doing the finishing edits for my publisher is set 2 years after 9/11, and so for children, that's history. And it's really easy because I remember. So I think you asked the question, what historical period I would like? One where I remember. So for example, Philip and I grew up, one of our favourite ice blocks was the Topper, and then they stopped it. And I discovered Tahiti has toppers. I'm so excited. So yeah, something that I don't have to go and read books at. I just have to remember.
Yeah, so similarly, my plan was to, lazy, I don't know, I'm strategic. So my plan was to write fantasy. I'm getting my dragons in there somehow. But like I said, based on Indian. Yeah, I was thinking about doing something based on Indian mythology. I could potentially set it in a historical time frame in India, because the other thing, obviously, that I write about is colonization. So if I was going to do something that was fantasy, like incorporating mythology, but also historical, I'd probably look at like the colonial Raj era in India. But I had not thought about that before, so if it ends up coming off, you'll get a credit.
Alors, du coup, là, je vais laisser du temps pour l'interaction avec le public. On va passer aux questions. Est-ce que quelqu'un a quelque chose à ajouter, une remarque, une question, une intervention quelconque pour nos intervenants qui sont devant? Non? Ça fait les timides. Ah.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for this moment. I have a question for Tania. That would be me. My question would be, you mentioned that you made a mistake, like an anachronism with the T, and that would be I'm curious to know how did it affect you in the moment, and did it change the way you approach the writing afterward?
It's like, as an English teacher and a writer, I hate having errors in books, like punctuation errors or things like that. So it annoyed me, and and I messaged the person and thanked them. And thankfully, when the international edition, this is the international edition, came out, I just changed it to drink. So that was really good. But yeah, what it did is just made me really careful. And even if I think I'm sure, to double check. So for the 11th century one, I was always checking the etymology of words, like when did they first appear. For the Charlie Tangaroa series, I have to be really careful that I don't appropriate another iwi's way of telling that story, and that if in doubt, I leave it out. That's the safest way.
Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre veut faire une intervention?
I wanted to talk about a historical point of view about William the Conqueror in the 12th century at the end of the Middle Ages. When he went to England, he civilized the English people who were always fighting against Saxons or Scandinavian people and so on. And that's how the French language invaded England. And I think that 3/4 of English come from French and Latin. It's very interesting before going into the Enlightenment period, after this barbaric time.
I agree.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation. J'ai juste une petite question, alors pas pour Bernard Domeyne, mais pour les ouvrages qui sont écrits en anglais. Est-ce qu'ils seront traduits?
Yes, mine is being published by, I'm going to say this wrong, Vent de Ils. Yes, so my first book is coming out next year. So, A Disappearance in Fiji. It will be called Sombre Plantation. And yeah, 2026.
Well, Charlie Tangaroa is in French, and book 2 is going to be. I haven't even told my publisher about my historical novel, so it's too big to translate. It's big. It's very good. It's won some awards, but I don't know. I'm just concentrating on Charlie Tangaroa at the moment.
I have a question for Tania regarding the approach, indigenous approach, Oceanian approach, I should say, to time. Like Whitty said in Le Pacte des Baleines, the past has never been and will never be behind us. Okay, so if the past is not behind us, if the past is in front of us, if the past is us now, how does that change writing historical novels?
Do you know Doctor Who?
Just a little bit.
So timey-wimey, you know. I really like that. Translated from the Māori, we walk backwards into the future, because our past informs our present, and so there's this wonderful atua god, Hini Raukorohia. She is the goddess of reflection, and what's really great about her thinking, her whakaaro, is she takes you to a point of reflection where you think about where you've come from and what's happened, and where you are now as a result of where you've come from, and what you are going forward to, and what you need now to prepare you for going forward. So it's that back and forth, and my husband is the same. We both use her and her story as a way to help our students take a moment to stop. How have you gone with this exercise, this lesson? what do you need more to go forward? So does that answer your question, Mere? Okay.
Sorry, just also in that could be in the structure of the book as well, this sort of cyclic sort of approach. And also, I translated the Hawaiian writer a few years ago, Christiana Kahakawila, and in one of her short stories, she speaks about this Hawaiian woman who speaks, she notes that when she speaks about the past, it's always in the present tense. You know, the gods come and they do this and they do that. It was always in the present tense. And I thought there was, those are little tweaks that are interesting in the writing of historical fiction.
You see that in the language in Te Reo Māori, that once you set up the time, basically, then everything's in present continuous. It's now. Like, it's not constantly in past tense. It's that the verb markers are neutral in a sense. And it reminds me of Briar's conversation and comment yesterday about the cyclical nature of time, like in the koru, and rather than being linear.
Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre veut interagir avec nos invités? Ah, je ne t'avais pas vu, Henri.
Thank you for your interpretation of time from the Maori. We have the same thing in Tahiti with Matamua, something like the eyes that look backwards. Very interesting, but you have to look forward, but it's backwards. Kind of anthropological future. It's the genius of language. Maybe we have the same thing in Africa or other countries. That's very interesting.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
Oh no, I was just going to say
that
there is I won't speak too much about it because I'm not Indigenous Australian, but it's the same with Indigenous Australians. They have this understanding of the past and relationship with the past that informs their future. Yeah, so it's a lot of Indigenous communities.
Sorry, this is me on the political. The thing that I find really frustrating, and it's probably the same with all Indigenous peoples, is the narrative we hear from many people, and this was my family, even my Māori family, was, look, that was in the past. It's over now. Let's just move on. But I think we've all had experiences in our life, particularly if we've suffered someone has done wrong, or there's been an injustice, and it is really hard to let it go, or a trauma that has affected us, whether it's a car accident or the death of a loved one. It changes the way that you are moving forward, and so I think this is why writing history, whether it's all the way back or just recently, it honours those who lived at that time.
Et ce sera le mot de la fin. J'aimerais qu'on applaudisse bien fort tous nos intervenants. Merci pour cet échange sur la thématique du passé. Et du coup, on continue avec notre voyage dans le temps. Et là, ça va être le présent avec le polar,